Olivia, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For sure. One swift Google search of your name and you find actually a lot of different things. So you've been in the media game, it seems like, for a bit, and you're an entrepreneur, you're a creative, a mogul. But I want to know how you describe yourself. Who is Olivia Charmaine?
Yeah, I love that question. Before anything, I always describe myself as an artist. And it's funny, I've been really self-reflective in the past few months. I'm about to hit my 30th birthday. So I think that's a natural, moment of transition. And I've kind of been reflecting back on my childhood even, and just how artistic I was and how creative I was. And over the years, I kind of lost that artistic expression a little bit. Being a development executive for many years, you basically kind of work behind the scenes. And so in being an entrepreneur and in working for myself for the past year, I've really started to not only rediscover my own voice, but rediscover my own artistic expression. So it's nice to be able to say that again. But yeah, I consider myself an artist before any of the other many hats that I wear.
Okay, an artist. I like that. And so, when I was doing my research, I saw that you worked on the last OG, 20s, which is one of my favorite shows. I hope they do more seasons.
Season two, I think is done shooting.
Oh, yes. That is great news. So you worked on 20s, which is really cool. American Dad. You have your own media company, Black Monarch Entertainment, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what inspired you to pursue media in this way, in a behind the scenes kind of executive role right now or in the past?
I would say my love for storytelling. I've always loved books. I grew up, my library card was one of my best possessions. I remember actually, I was probably maybe 7, 8 years old. And one day I was walking home from the library and I lost my library card and I was crying and panicking and I had to go back and retrieve it. So I loved it. I would go every day, get a new stack of books, finish them and return them. So storytelling. And as I, got older and I went to Tisch for film school. So I learned a lot about the business there from a holistic perspective, whether it was learning how to direct or write or edit or do sound design. But it wasn't until, I had a professor who was also development executive, and she taught me about that side of the business. And it was a way for me to really combine my creative side with my analytical business side. That felt really natural. But it all comes back to storytelling. It wasn't just storytelling, it was diverse storytelling. And so I became really passionate and then a firm advocate, and then now someone who can really turn on the resources for, information, relationships, money, opportunity when it comes to diverse storytelling. And when I say diversity, I specifically mean, not just race, but also age, ability, religion, sexuality, all kinds of, different types of diversity and inclusion as well, and equity.
Right. And it's actually nice to, speak to someone who actually I can very much relate to as far as, your identity. And it seems as though identity shapes a lot of projects that you work on, a lot of who you are, a lot of the things that you do. And you were speaking on a little bit, but how important do you feel like representation is in the media?
It's everything. I did a lot of work in children's media when I first got started. I was at Nickelodeon and DreamWorks and a nonprofit called Sweet Blackberry, another small company called Too Tall. And both of those companies were educational as well as focused on kids media. And when I was learning about how a person's brain develops, especially a child's brain, it's a sponge, it's absorbent, as we know. But it really comes down to why are they learning the way that they're learning? How are they learning the way that they're learning? And how do they interact with the world? And it really comes down to representation. What I love so much about how representation has evolved over the years is, especially with Gen Z, a lot of the self-identifying is incredibly forthcoming and incredibly direct. So in saying I know a lot of non-binary people, and that was something that not even so many years ago wasn't even part of a conversation, for example. So I think that media can do an even better job of keeping up. I study a lot of reports like the UCLA Diversity Report and the Race in the Writers' Room Report, and USC Annenberg has studies that come out every year with statistics and things like that. But a lot of times the statistics kind of flatline. We have a lot of numbers that are very similar year over year. And so I think I'm very excited by a lot of different shows that I see, and a lot of different books that I'm reading, and music that I listen to, and poetry, and all of these things. But there's always more work to be done. And I think that work starts with the artist, but it also is not just the burden of the artist, but also the executives, and the gatekeepers, for the artist's work, in order to make sure that representation not just stays on the artist's canvas, but also is hung in the gallery, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you say there's always more work to be done. I think that sometimes people stop at the introduction of the talk of diversity. They, and then that's pretty much it. Like, oh, cool, we had a day where we spoke about it, or we had an episode where and that's, scratching the surface. And that's, I think what's really important, like you were saying, is to make it a part of the conversation on a consistent basis. But let's talk about your show. Let's talk about The Tea with Olivia Charmaine.
Yeah, so The Tea started off almost a year ago now. Now that it's September, I started off like mid-October of last year, just kind of, going back contextually. It was about a week or two before the election, which is crazy. The social anxiety, the cultural, political anxiety was at an all-time high. I'd had a lot of big transitions in my life. I was feeling really isolated, as a lot of us were, during the pandemic, like middle of the pandemic, before vaccines and things like that. I wanted an opportunity to connect with my friends, with my peers, with people I knew, people that I admired. I had the idea for The Tea for many years. At first I was like, maybe it'll be a podcast or something. But again, my career was behind the scenes. And so, it's not something that I could do at the time. And so at this point, I had just started being an entrepreneur. I just started working for myself, and I was like, hey, I have the time, I have the space, why don't I do it? As I was starting to have these interviews and these conversations, it was always very intentional, right? So I always wanted to talk about self-care and wellness with every conversation, especially during the pandemic with artists. Like, how are you actually doing, and how are you doing what you're doing? But also artistic expression and inspiration. So I would talk to people like Janelle Monáe and not just ask them about, what new album do you have coming out? But I would say, what inspires you? What music are you listening to? What art, what's your artistic process? Things like that. And every time I interviewed someone, I would also want to ask them questions that they've probably never been asked before. So I'd ask someone like Jandena, like, would you rather meet your ancestors or your descendants? And we had like a huge expansive conversation about that. It was a great conversation. Yeah, it was so interesting. And so, people really started tuning in and tapping in. And I also, on the IGTV show, I loved putting people onto different types of tea. Why tea is because I truly love it. I adore it. I've loved it, my whole life. But it's also herbal medicine. So it's medicinal, it's warm, it's inviting. And that intention of like having a hot cup of tea and just, opening the door for a free flowing conversation, was the intention behind this space. And so I love putting people onto like Black owned brands and female owned brands and queer brands and things like that. So I was just having fun. I was having a lot of fun doing the show every week. My production company, Black Monarch, we did our first ever production, which was The Tea with Olivia Charmaine. We shot 5 episodes. And it was so incredible. It was such a great experience. The show is coming together really well. And now the process that we're in, and this is, totally an exclusive, is, many networks and studios and production companies are now fighting over it and deciding like what home it's going to live at, which is really exciting. And so, yeah, it's really exciting. So I can't quite yet say where you'll see the episodes or where you'll see like, the show or new produced episodes or however that's going to work. But I will say in the next few months, there'll be like a nice, big, exciting announcement.
So as an audience perspective, what would you say they should be most excited to see when it does come out, when it is finally released?
Yeah, I think, well, the framework of the show is, again, it's artists. So the guests are either up and coming artists that you know might not be household names, and then there's going to be headliners, as I call them, you know, that are like, oh my God, I can't believe you got X, Y, and Z on the show. And so I think there's going to be an exciting conversation. It's also like it turned into a bit of a variety show where there's like musical performances and comedians, and there was a magician, which was like my favorite. I was like, I love magic. It became really fun. You know, but I think that it's funny. I think that it's entertaining. But there's also like big themes that are talked about. I kind of call it like Oprah meets Mr. Rogers, and that, you know, in the way that Mr. Rogers would kind of come into a room and come into his own space, and he would, you know, take off his shoes and put on slippers and kind of change out from his outside jacket to a sweater and be like, listen, today we're talking about divorce, or today we're talking about the war, or we're talking about these big issues, but in a way that is like super relatable and comforting. That's how I wanted to feel. So the themes of some of the episodes we shot were like wellness, mental health, self-care, representation was an episode.
For the last question that we have, you know, we are Celeb Secrets. So we like to ask questions based off of maybe kind of something that we don't know. We like to know a secret. I don't know if you have any secrets, or if it's something like, you know, what is your favorite tea or something like that. But what is something that people do not know about Olivia Charmaine that
that's a fun question. And I love a fun question too. I would say something that I don't think I've ever spoken publicly about, but is super funny about me. My very first job when I was 16, well, I guess after like babysitting and being a dog sitter and things like that in the neighborhood, my very first job was actually being a host. It was for a live performance. It's actually really funny. At a kid's show at an amusement park. It was Dora's Sing-Along Adventure. And it was Dora as like, you know, those big characters, like a person who like is in a suit. So it's Dora, Boots, and then myself. It's a link I can send you. There's like clips on YouTube that someone else posted. It's hysterical. But essentially at the amusement park, we did like 5 shows a day, 6 days a week for the entire summer. And, you know, kids would come in and basically I'd be like, hey guys, like we're going on an adventure. Me, Dora, Boots, like we're about to go have this party. Like, let's get it. There were songs, musical numbers. Yeah, it's so funny because I was so young. But yeah, it was a dream job, especially in high school. I would get some money and I'd be like, now I can like pay for bowling and movies with my friends. Like it was super fun. But yeah, a lot of people don't know like that my very first job was as a host, as an entertainer.
That's a crazy first job. I love it.
Yeah, it's so random. But yeah.